Okay, good morning, everyone. So unfortunately, I don't have any nice fancy slides for exam 2 review. Usually we do like a trivia in class, and so these are the questions I usually give you, but I'll talk through some of the important ones that I think you guys should focus on and kind of give you some like general review. Remember, I fully trust Sophia in giving you guys this exam review, so please do attend her review session and she'll kind of help you work through these a little bit more. Okay, so for module 4, which we're really talking about like macronutrients and nutrition and everything like that, glycemic load and glycemic index are definitely the most important things. So remember that activity in class where we had those like 4 different graphs and you guys had to identify what was a high GI and what was a low GI or high GL, low GL. Make sure you know that, right? So see if you can recreate those graphs and really identify which is what. A little tip and trick for you, the way I remember the difference when it comes to a graph is the height or the spike of the graph has to do with the GI, and then the length is equal to the load. So height or spike is index, length is equal to load. So hopefully that helps you guys identify the difference between the two, and then obviously knowing the different formulas. Glycemic index doesn't really have a formula you guys need to know, but glycemic load does. And then the last question for this one is, what is the recommended protein intake for normal adults? So what is recommended for normal adults? What about for strength athletes? And then what about for endurance athletes? Is there a difference in how much protein they should be consuming and why? Module 5 kind of relates to what we talked about in lab this week. So kind of talking about action potentials, neurotransmitters, all that good stuff. So a couple of important things to look at for this module is, what are Schwann cells? Why are they important? What are they made out of? And what is the disease that affects them? And why does it do that, right? So you guys will learn about MS in lecture this week. So kind of take a look at that and how is that relevant to Schwann cells. And then what happens to sodium channels and potassium channels during depolarization or repolarization. So just knowing all the steps of an action potential, right? You start at resting and then you hit your action potential threshold. There's a depolarization and then a repolarization, potentially a hyperpolarization, and then back to resting potential. So what is happening at each of those steps where the sodium channels are either opening or closing and the potassium channels are either opening or closing. And what is the difference between the two, right? So we have our voltage-gated sodium channels, which are a bit quicker, a bit more reactive, whereas we have our potassium channels, which are a little bit slower and they don't open and close as quickly. So what does that affect and why? Think about positives and negatives. I know not everyone's good at math, that's okay. Okay, and then the last module, which is a bit more challenging, this is probably the most difficult one. The biggest thing there's a lot from this section. Well, technically he makes it pretty even, but there's a lot of dense information in this session. So if you go back and really want to focus on one, it should be this module. So you have the autonomic reflex arc. Hopefully you drew a picture of that. I'm not going to cover it too much, but knowing the difference between afferent and an efferent muscle fiber is important. And then we have our muscle spindle versus our Golgi tendon organ. So making sure you know what activates a muscle spindle. So is it stretch or is it force? And what activates a Golgi tendon, stretch or force? And then where are each located? And I'm gonna give you a little hint because some people get a little confused by this. A muscle spindle is equivalent to an intrafusal fiber. A muscle spindle is the same thing as an intrafusal fiber. They mean the same thing. They can be used synonymously. So think about where that muscle spindle is located and where is the Golgi tendon organ located. And again, how is that relevant to what they are activated by or what they detect? And then this is really difficult for everyone across the board. So going back and understanding the difference between autogenic inhibition and reciprocal inhibition. My biggest piece of advice for this one is identifying what is the action you're doing, what is your agonist, and what is your antagonist, right? And then understanding auto versus reciprocal inhibition. Hopefully Sophia goes that a little bit more, but whenever you have a question like that, just tackle what's the action, what's the agonist, what's the antagonist. Understanding type 1 versus type 2. We haven't talked about that in lab, and I don't remember if he talks about it in this section, but it'll play a big part next exam. And then knowing the whole neuromuscular contraction pathway, right? So from top to bottom, how does an action potential begin all the way until how do we stop a muscle action? So how do we, this last question, how can we turn off excitation contraction coupling? So there's two answers for that one as well. So we have calcium has two answers, and then this excitation contraction coupling also has two answers. So I will add that here. And again, having that whole pathway written out for you, right? So even if it's right next to you, remember you have open notes for this exam. Even if it's right next to you, you have it listed out step by step, so that way you can kind of tackle any question that comes your way. Just to recap, all of the questions are going to be randomized. That means you might get a free response question in the middle of your multiple choice. So plan accordingly. When it comes to multiple choice, crank through as fast as you can. Obviously, take your time, read the question, because you can get tripped up on that. But you really want to make sure you reserve enough time for these big multiple choice questions, these big free response questions, because as you guys saw in last exam, they can get pretty long, especially when you're trying to order something. So good luck, guys. Remember, you can always email me if you're taking a look at these other questions. You're like, I don't know why she has that on there. I got these all from his learning objectives in the beginning of each section. So I didn't come up with these myself. They are there for you. Go through all those questions if you want. I will be answering emails about the exam up until Tuesday morning when your exam opens. And then again, once the exam closes, we get all the grades back, I will be happy to sit down with you and go through it again. So good luck studying, guys. I will not see you until next week. So you guys got this. You'll be okay.